Afshin Rattansi is a former producer for Al Jazeera. He joins us now from London. Thanks very much for being here today. I really want to know how this conflict has affected the hearts and minds of the Arab street.
Well, it's interesting that Secretary Rice met Mahmoud Abbas. No one in the Arab street, as it's called, euphemistically, I suppose, because many Arab governments don't reflect the street. Surely Mahmoud Abbas would not be the right person to meet. He was the PLO. They were not elected. It was Hamas that were re-elected in a democratic election there. So it's interesting that Secretary Rice seems to be talking to the wrong person. That certainly would be the view of the Arab street. In more general terms, the Arab street, its view actually reflects quite a lot of opinion here on the London street or the British street, I have to say.
So the fact that she didn't meet with what we would call a terrorist organization like Hezbollah or Hamas, I keep using the Arab street, again, a term that you don't particularly like. Do you really think that she should have met with...
Quite a good term. I remember at Al Jazeera, when that term started to be used, there was a certain... You wouldn't talk about the New York street, you wouldn't talk about the... Well, you wouldn't talk about the American street, because streets in American cities are so different. But I think there is a reason to use the term Arab street, because so often the governments of Arab countries do not reflect the views of the majority.
Well, let's go right back to the Arab street then. I'll use it. Hezbollah. Exactly. A lot of people are saying it's their fault. This entire problem over the last few weeks is Hezbollah's fault. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, many different countries, Arab countries saying, yes, it's Hezbollah's fault. The Arab street, do they believe that?
I think what's particularly important here is to consider what it means for Americans.
Do they believe that?
Because, well, as far as the Arab street, or as far as the Arab world looks at this conflict, it was begun by the Israelis capturing a doctor and his son. We still don't know, we don't know their names, in Gaza. The Hamas then, well, it wasn't actually Hamas, it was probably Islamic Jihad, we don't know, captured that Israeli soldier. Then, in solidarity, Hezbollah thought they were opening a second flank from Lebanon. But out of all of this, who has won? Who is winning this situation? Iran loves the high gas prices that this causes. It's becoming more powerful. Anyway, it was more powerful because Iraq is such a mess, and Iran is supporting members in the Iraqi parliament. Syria, Secretary Rice seemed to point to an idea that there may be negotiations between the United States and Damascus, Washington and Damascus, which is quite a thing. So if you look, who is benefiting from all of this?
So you see the difference in perception here, Juliet, and our audience. We're going to talk more about this after the break.
Yes, Afshin Rattansi, please stick around. We have many more questions for you here on Dayside. We're going to bring our audience in on this. Two very different points of view in the Middle East, the Arab media versus the Western media. Is there a campaign against Israel? No matter what they do, are they always wrong according to the Arab media? We're going to be talking about that.
And brokering peace in the Middle East, everyone seems to agree on an international peacekeeping force, but no one wants to send troops. How do we get the job done? We'll talk about that ahead on Dayside. Welcome back to Dayside. We are talking war and peace in the Middle East, and if the Arab media is distorting the view of what is really going on and actually fueling the flames of hate.
Afshin Rattansi is still with us. He's a former producer for Al Jazeera. And here in our New York studio, editor-in-chief of U.S. News and World Report, Mort Zuckerman. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to start with you. Do you feel there's a campaign of hatred by the Arab media against Israel?
Well, I think without question, I've been reading the Arab media in a translation for years and years and years, and it is absolutely inciting to hatred, not only Israel, but America and Jews. It's very anti-Semitic, very anti-Israel, and very anti-Western. And it's almost unanimous across the Arab media, with very rare exceptions. What is interesting about what's going on this time is that Al-Ahram, for example, the leading newspaper in Egypt, attacked Hamas for what they called their adventurism, and they said Hamas doesn't listen to anybody else's opinions, they only listen to their own, and therefore they're not going to get the support of the Arab world. The Sunni countries, Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, have all, for the first time, come out publicly against Hezbollah and against Hamas. So you have now a little bit of activity in the Arab media because they reflect the government's views to such a remarkable degree.
Let's pick a piece of video here. We've all seen over the last couple of hours here on Fox News Channel this big explosion in Beirut. Well, let's run it if we can find it. How would you, look this right here, boom. How would you describe that piece of video, Mort?
How would I describe it?
For the magazine?
Well, it's obviously a bunker bomb type of explosion. That is to say, a bomb that reflects a possibility of, based on Israeli tactical intelligence, that there's an underground bunker where Hezbollah leadership is, for whatever reason, concentrated.
Afshin, you describe what you're looking at there, that explosion in Beirut.
Unfortunately, the studio here in London doesn't allow me to see.
It's a gigantic explosion.
There.
It's a gigantic explosion in one of the suburbs, southern suburb of Beirut.
I think I would have described it just as Mort has described it. It's a huge bomb. I think what we have to realize here, and I should say Al Jazeera was the first Arab channel to broadcast the views of Israeli politicians.
Yeah.
For too long in the Arab world, just as Mort is saying, the media was completely biased, would not have Israeli politicians on because they didn't recognize the state of Israel. Al Jazeera was the first channel to allow Israeli politicians to appear on it. Having said that, it's noticeable that Mort seems to see that Arab newspapers finally criticizing Hamas is a good sign. No, what that means is that Arab governments are terrified that Islamist forces within their own countries who want to overthrow their governments are to the fore because of this conflict. And that is why Arab governments are very keen to distance themselves from groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah, who will, well, some predict, try to overthrow these countries, particularly Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Yes, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think there is now a fear in some of the sort of older line Arab governments, Saudi Arabia in particular, but Egypt as well. If you had a real, genuine democratic election in Saudi Arabia with bin Laden on the ticket, bin Laden would get 75% of the vote. In Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood would get, God knows, certainly a majority. So these are not popular governments, but they are in power and they have established themselves. They do not want the extremists, particularly the religious extremist elements, to take over the political opposition. But now the Muslim Brotherhood has become the second largest party in Egypt, so they're very worried about that.
It's a little disconcerting
but
this
then
morning.
one must look at the fact that those Arab people that hate their governments, they realize that those Arab governments are only in power because of the help of the United States. It's the United States that backs the government of Saudi Arabia.
And the government of Egypt, I suppose, but I'm not sure that it's the United States that's keeping them in power. They themselves are very effective with their own secret police and intelligence services. They're very effective at maintaining their own power. There are no American forces there.
I think, well, I mean, I would say Egypt is a huge, gets huge amounts of subsidy from U.S. taxpayers and huge amounts of arms. But I think this does raise the much more pertinent question, which is, how is all of this endangering United States national security?
That's a great question. Give us a quick answer because we've got about 40 seconds left. Quick answer, Afshin.
I think either side. If you're for Israel, you believe that Israel is surrounded by neighbors that hate it. You're on the other side. You say Israel is a state which has broken 66 UN Council resolutions, has broken the Geneva Convention. Either side. What does it mean for America? It means that those pictures of those 400, 300 children that were killed by Israel will be used by Al-Qaeda to try and have another 9/11 in the United States.
Well, but look, the very fact is the United States must be in opposition to Hezbollah and Hamas because they are totally against American interests, and they are the godchildren of Syria and Iran, who are totally against American interests. We want to make sure we do not lose control of that part of the world to the extremist groups.
Afshin Rattansi, Mort Zuckerman, thanks, gentlemen, for being here today. We appreciate it.
A lot more from the Middle East.